Welcome to What the Paper Said, in which I, Patrick Crozier, skim through the Times from 100 years ago, read some of the articles and comment on the ones I find interesting. This episode is for the week ending the 12th of October 1924, and the big news is that at the end of the month, Great Britain is going to have yet another general election. What happened is that the Conservatives/Unionists put down a motion censuring the government for its handling of the Workers' Weekly sedition case, see last week's episode. The Liberals put down an amendment referring the whole matter to a select committee. The government, being dependent on Liberal support or at least indifference, lost the vote and called a general election. And now for some of the other items that have caught my attention this week. Following the news last week that coal mines are set to close, comes the news that a couple of blast furnaces in the northeast have closed. That means that 40 are working, while normally there would be 70. There have been floods in northern India. On Monday, the Times reported on a speech by Irish Republican leader Eamon de Valera. He said that they would never cease from working for the establishment of a republic. There would never be prosperity in Ireland until she had perfect freedom. Well, Ireland declared itself a republic in 1937. Did prosperity follow? No. No, it did not. Ireland remained poor until the 1990s. Also note that the freedom, as he calls it, independence to the rest of us, has to be perfect before it will do any good. How often have we heard that sort of claim over the years? I have previously mentioned the saga of Chesham Place, which once upon a time housed the Russian embassy. This week, the Times told us that the current occupants, an assortment of émigré groups, had moved out in preparation for the Soviet diplomatic staff to move in. Zaghlul Pasha has returned to Egypt, apparently empty-handed after his talks with the Labour government in London. There are proposals for an orbital road around London, at least the northern bit, although on a much less grand scale than the M25, which takes a rather similar route. The idea is to mainly use existing roads, but to straighten them and widen them where necessary. In an article on Wednesday, we learnt that there will be very few exports of wheat from the Soviet Union this year. Yes, they're going to be short of wheat this year, and someone is going to be short of pocket money. This is from Friday. A boy pressed the emergency stoppage button of the Never Stop Railway at the British Empire Exhibition yesterday and caused a stoppage of the whole system. It was estimated that the boy's mischievous act caused a loss of about £100. A gang of bicycle thieves operating in London has been given sentences between 3 and 18 months. This got me wondering if people had bicycle locks in those days. I don't think they did. In an article about the campaign of John Davis, the Democrat nominee for president, the author had this to say about his main opponent. In the meantime, Mr. Coolidge has continued to say as little as possible. Mr. Coolidge's plan and design is to hold fast to the Conservative vote and to expose his person as seldom as possible to the eyes and to the appraisal of the electorate. All through his career in politics, that has always been his plan. Always it has proved successful, and he is not departing from it. American politicians hiding themselves from a public scrutiny. Couldn't happen today. In an article on the war, the Times used the term Schlieffenplan. This was the German plan to defeat France in 6 weeks at the beginning of the First World War. It made me wonder when that became current. Presumably it couldn't have happened during the war, when it would have been a secret, even after its failure. I can only imagine that someone spilled the beans afterwards. In a similar vein, I noticed the use of shadow cabinet to refer to senior members of the opposition. I haven't seen that term before. John Wheatley is a figure who has largely been forgotten, but he could stake a claim to be the moral conscience of the Labour Party at the time. Or certainly close to it. He is currently the Minister of Health, which for obscure reasons makes him the Minister for Housing. This week he had this to say. Those opposed to the Labour government were dominated by the class view of political society and public affairs, and they did not want peace with Russia. That sounds awfully like what we today refer to as projection. They wanted war with Russia. The Soviet government of Russia had ousted capitalism. It was not promoting Russia for the Russians. You can say that again. But was acting as a trustee who held Russia for the workers of the world. And so Labour's opponents wanted war with Russia. They wanted to crush Russia before she became too strong an opponent in the industrial or even the military field. Ah, those days when communists thought they could make people rich. As to the amount of the loan, he declared that if the Labour government had submitted to Parliament a proposal to spend £50 million in crushing Russia, there would be no talk of a general election today. Maybe, Mr. Wheatley, but it would have been money well spent. I say that and then think, maybe not. Communism had such a strong grip on people's imagination that it not only had to fail, but be seen to fail, and then spend 30 years skulking around university social science departments before once again emerging as a force in the world. I saw this in Monday's edition. This week's issue of The Economist contains an interesting calculation of national income. It gives the net national income for 1923 as $3.47 billion, an increase of $330 million on 1922. This increase is shown to have been a real increase and due not to a change in price level, for that was unchanged, but to an increase in production. This is estimated to have amounted to 95% of the 1923 figure, an increase of 9 points on 1922. Now, I'm going to start with some caveats here. We don't know what the methodology is. Do they mean the modern, rarely used net national income figure, gross domestic product, gross national product, or something different? Also, how would they know, in what is after all a cash-based society, what people earn? But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the figure is meaningful. Without that assumption, it is interesting enough. An annual growth rate of almost 10%? That's amazing. Nowadays governments are delighted if the number gets to 3%. Also note that 6 years on from the war, national income is yet to reach pre-war levels. So assuming this figure is meaningful, how rich were our forebears? Well, 3.47 billion is equivalent to 69 billion shillings. At a prevailing rate of 92 shillings per troy ounce, that would buy you 754 million ounces of gold. There are about 44 million inhabitants of Great Britain, so that gives you 17.1 troy ounces per person. At today's prices, that gives £34,288. But gold in 1924 was overvalued, so you have to apply the Crozier fudge factor and divide by 2, which gives us £17,144 per person. The figure for 2018, the most recent I could find, is $35,835. The average exchange rate for that year was 0.7514, which gives us £26,826. So if the figures are to be believed, we are now half as well off again as they were then. Mind you, in those days no one had access to the internet, mobile phones, antibiotics, polio vaccines, or television. But the best is yet to come. Bear in mind that the current ratio of taxation to net national income is, according to the Adam Smith Institute, 44%. The ratio of taxation to national income is also given. This is shown to have amounted to 18.8% in 1923 against 22.2% in 1922 and 71% in 1913. Comparison is made with the figures for the United States, where the ratio of taxation to income was 11.6% in 1923 against 12.1% in 1922 and 6.4% in 1913. In France last year the ratio was 16%, or 2.8% less than in this country. So taxation has trebled from pre-war levels. I wonder how much of that is due to the need to pay off debt. Even so, that is a level of taxation that we can only dream about, and they got an empire into the bargain. And France has lower levels. Not something you would expect at all. Anyway, that's all for this week. There were plenty of other things I would like to have covered, but due to time, ignorance or sloth didn't get round to. For instance, there were articles on Persia, Rome and coal nationalisation. and speeches by Churchill, James Maxton and James Craig. As ever, I aim to have something up next week, but I promise nothing.